In the days before everyone worked in an office, there was a community of orchard farmers. 2 of them had fertile lands and could grow their trees easily. One had enough trees to meet their needs and felt that another would be more trouble than it was worth. The other did not have an inclination one way or the other. Then, some night, the one that felt they had enough dropped some of their fruit pits in the darkened field and could not find them. They thought little of it and made their way home. That same night, the other, with fertile land, was attacked in the dark by another farmer, and the pits that they carried were unknowingly scattered. The injured farmer rushed to the police to report the incident, understandably upset. A few weeks later, they both found a little sprout out among the rows. The one who had had enough tore it out because they did not have the time or energy to tend to another, and the one who was attacked did as well because they couldn't bear to have a reminder to the horror. The young growths were cast out with the rest of their garbage that week. Now, a little ways down the road were some other farmers whose land was not as fertile. One farmer had been trying for years to grow trees and had not had any success. The other had spent those same years away from their farm, working in the city. They were coming back now and decided the time was right for starting their own orchard. However, they did not have enough time left to go through trial and error. Then there came a specialist to town. This specialist had a greenhouse where they could carefully monitor seedlings, measuring their resilience and health, in order to find the ideal candidates to grow into strong trees. Each of the farmers gave of their own supply of pits and paid the specialist a large sum of money to do the work. After a while, the farmers met with the specialist, who let them know which of the 24 seedlings were the best prospects. The specialist took the 2 chosen back to the farms and carefully planted them. The one who had struggled all those years rejoiced as one of the trees took root. The one who had lived in the city had no such luck and returned to the specialist again to try. The seedlings who were not chosen were locked away in the specialist's greenhouse where they might be used later. Further on, the land was not suitable for trees at all. Still, 2 farmers lived there, and they wanted to have at least one tree of their own. They came up with similar plans. One of them had kin who had a fertile farm nearby, and the other found a farm a long way off that had fruitful soil. These 2 sets of parties came to their own agreement of terms. The farmer with the poor soil would give the landowner a pit from their own stock, and the landowner would grow the tree for them in their land. The farmer with the kin spent day after day visiting the farm, tending to the tree as best they could, knowing they could only do so much. The farmer who traveled away paid the landowners for all expenses that occurred because of the growing, and received letters about its progress. Once the trees were grown enough to be stable, the farmer returned. They took the tree from the place where it grew back to their unproductive farms in town, and planted them in their soil. The trees grew, but not well. It was though the tree knew it was not where it came from. Today, as we shift our gaze out, we ask the question, how should Christians approach modern issues of procreation? Hello and welcome to another episode of Up and Out, the show of honest questions and earnest answers. And I don't know, maybe that was a curveball from our intro there leading into the question, but it's a difficult topic that we have today. We're covering issues of procreation. Let me introduce my co-hosts before I get too far into this. We're grappling. Yeah. This over here I have got Sam Miller.
Hello.
And over here I have William Hodge. Hi. And today, issues of procreation. So if the allegory, I won't use a different word that may put it in a different sort of light. But the allegory, if it was too obtuse for you, today we're talking about abortion, surrogacy, and IVF, which not necessarily in that order. It's actually per the intro. It's abortion, IVF, and surrogacy, because they all essentially build off of one another, which is already starting us off on a pretty hot foot there.
Right.
So I guess disclaimer, we're going to talk about this very honestly here, as we have laid out in our sort of mission statement of honest questions and earnest answers. how should Christians approach these modern issues? How should Christians approach abortion and IVF and surrogacy? And I want to start off here. I want to start off here. You saw my note. That, let me make sure I get my wording right. That we owe no loyalty to science. That was my first note here. Science is a tool for humanity. It is a tool to help us, but it is not in itself the end. Science has no end goal in mind. It is humans that have to put morality and put the proper guardrails on science so that it doesn't grow beyond its bounds. And I think that a lot of these issues are tied up in that question. We found out that we can do something, and since we can do it, we then went to the degree that we should do it because we figured out how to do it. It's along with a lot of other scientific advancements that we won't get into here. Some of them are very good, like, cancer treatments. That's a very good thing that science has discovered.
Clean water. I mean, easy.
Yeah. Desalination, things like that, where we can get water where places it had been easily available previously.
Right.
Science can be used for good, but science doesn't know what it is.
Yes.
So I think that that's where I want to start with this, because we now go from that into abortion. We'll just go ahead and dive right into it. And I don't know if you can read it on our faces here, but we're all being very careful here, because abortion, all these issues are very difficult. I have family members who were born through IVF. So, I mean, this touches my family directly. I don't have anybody who's had a surrogacy yet, but they did. It was discussed when the IVF was not working well.
Yes.
And something I heard on a podcast recently, it was an interview a few Wednesdays ago. I can't remember the man's name now. But he made the point that when you're having these conversations and you're torturing yourself over every word because you don't want to hurt the other person, because you don't want to speak out of turn, that is an indication that you're viewing them as a human being and not as an abstract thought. Because you can treat abstract thoughts however you want. Right. But when we're trying to approach this from the perspective of, these are all human beings involved here. And I mean that literally. Down to, from my point of view, it's fertilization onward. Once you have a full set of DNA, that is a human being onward. So starting from that perspective, that answers a lot of the questions that come up in this sort of conversation. But we're taking this slowly so that we are not speaking out of turn and unnecessarily hurting people.
I'm gonna.
At least I am.
So
I am too.
Okay, glad to hear
it. All trepidation aside, what the thought that came to mind is to still talk about all three at once.
Yeah.
I think I would take the stance that these are wrong, but nuanced.
So I actually think, I think two of them are inherently wrong.
Yes.
I think that abortion from day one is wrong. And I think that surrogacy, you cannot do it ethically. IVF is the one where you could, depending on your view on onanism, I'll use the term.
You're going to have to define that.
I'll bleep it out. Because I think that will get us flagged.
Right.
But onanism, as I'll call it. I don't think the censors will pick that up. IVF, if you did single egg fertilization and single implantation, you could theoretically do it ethically, depending on your view of onanism.
I think the thing with that, though, is it costs a lot.
Yes. No,
to do it ethically costs people more than what the average couple would be able to afford. So that's why we get to a sticky ethical situation, because for the average couple, it already costs a lot of money to do the IVF treatments.
Yeah, I mean, to have a kid in general, it costs a lot of money.
And so they have to, it's a lot of money to pay just for them to get a lot of eggs at once versus just take one and it doesn't work. let me pay that again,
Right.
and take another one.
No, and that I'm speaking in the most abstract terms. That of the 3 topics we have today, IVF is the only one that you could theoretically do ethically. Yeah, like realistically, it's the cost of it would be so exorbitant that it's not feasible to do it ethically, which then leads you down the slippery slope of, well, we could do it a little bit differently. If you have to, and the desire for children, we'll have a whole different episode on children in general, but the desire to have children is natural and good.
Right.
We'll also throw that here at the beginning. I personally don't have any children because I am single. That's a terrible thing. I'm going to cut that out.
So
comment down below, ladies. Listen, I'm taking this very seriously,
should do
okay? I'm probably going to have to, just because I don't like to edit these things too digital, too granularly. But please save me, Sam.
I'm gonna try and rescue you by potentially throwing myself out into the sharks.
Okay.
So I guess where I agree. So we'll start with abortion, I suppose.
Okay. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. This is wrong. And specifically, I think where the nuance comes in is I think there are obviously cases of for protecting the mother's life, and for the case of rape, incest, things like that happen that are obviously also incredibly terrible.
So I will backtrack on my thing. I think that the only case that I could even consider abortion as being quote unquote ethical would be in the case of life of the mother.
Okay.
The abortion and incest caveats are thrown out there a lot, but
You mean rape?
Yeah. Yes. Incest and rape are thrown out there a lot. That they're not a substantial portion of.
Yes.
They're barely even a fractional portion
Right.
of abortions.
There is a flippantness, I think, to abortion that we have taken on as a society today that I think is costly. I think there is it leads to a subconscious, if nothing else, degradation of the value of human life. And so I don't think you can call abortion in any of these cases anything but murder. You are electing to take a life that you have deemed at least less valuable, even in the case of saving the mother's life. And so, again, with the nuance, I think this is where we need an abundance of grace.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I try to approach this very cautiously, but I do hold firmly that I think abortion is murder. I think that is the clearest line I'm willing to draw.
So, who does that hang on then? Because I would say it would hang on the abortionists themselves.
The one receiving the procedure?
No,
or
the
doctor?
abortionist, the one performing it, because they're actually completing the act.
Well, then, if nothing else, the one receiving it is complicit in it, and I would
Yes.
say then that in this case, the father would also be complicit in it, even though they are given less legal standing, at least as far as the American system is.
I mean, he's certainly complicit in the act.
Yes.
That's an interesting question I hadn't thought of fully, is because a lot of times it is as often proclaimed, it is the woman's choice.
Right.
But I also think that there's been so much lying about abortion and the moniker of fetus, calling them fetuses, saying that they're not really human. That's why my intro here is very purposefully constructed. Because they will say that what would you call a seed a tree? And my response to that is a seed is a tree if you give it enough time. So that's why I use that in the introduction. And
seeds themselves are fertilized.
Right.
They have been fertilized.
Yes, because it's after the pollination process.
So it holds true.
Right.
I'm not sure if we are belaboring abortion part, because I think we largely agree. I think the tenderness comes into the fact that I agree, we're lied to and we're fooling ourselves in a lot of cases. That there are several stories of women that receive this procedure and they come away like heartbroken.
Yes.
And the thing that the church is failing to do, I think, in that regard, is meeting them on both ends. I think we are trying to all three sides, perhaps. We aren't meeting them before. There are life centers, I believe they're called.
Crisis pregnancy centers.
Yeah. And so that's trying to at least inform the individual, but I think we could minister more and show God's love more as well on the other end of this happened, and receive them as like, yes, now here's why it was heartbreaking. Here's why it was hard, because it is hard. It is terrible. What you experienced is loss.
Yeah, you had something.
I'm going to throw myself at the sharks now.
All right.
Okay.
I'm going to make myself really unpopular. I think we give a lot of... It's our job to give people grace. Mm-hmm. It is. But I feel we also... We let women... We give... We give a little... I'm trying.
All right.
We give a lot of grace to women who have abortions. And I think I'll agree with you, too, that young girls, I'll even say early 20s, don't know what they're doing. And I think our culture has lied to them a lot. Mm-hmm. But I feel that there is a certain point. I think women intuitively are more in touch with their bodies than we sometimes give them credit for.
Yeah.
And I think... Yeah. There's a point where they know where they're going in. They know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. I think that is a fair point to make. That these situations are not all the same when it comes to abortion. Like if you're a 21-year-old, if you're a 16-year-old, that is a different situation than a person who is on like their fourth abortion. Mm-hmm. Like that's a different situation.
Right.
Those are because you've gone through it multiple times.
There's people that scream they're proud.
There's a reveling in it even that I think is just so. I mean, that's a different topic in and of itself. I think the people that have gone so far into that form of hatred.
Yeah,
but I guess I'll.
I feel like there's an element to this where speaking to a woman who may have had multiple abortions but hasn't had a child yet. I know there's women who have had children who have abortions, which is a whole nother hard thing to deal with. But there's an element of not being able to see a child fully start to grow. Like when a child's in the womb, it's almost like we're not, because we can't see them as a human being with our visual, like our physical eyes, it's hard to grasp the importance and meaning of that life.
Yes, but I think you make a good point that I think we should give the women's intuition more credit for the sake of keeping them anonymous. I know someone that has had to receive 2 D&Cs because of a failed embryo. Like there wasn't a baby, or the baby failed to properly attach, and therefore wasn't growing. And both of those experiences were immensely heartbreaking for this individual. And I believe for at least one of them, if not both, she knew immediately something was wrong, and then had to therefore go and went to the hospital and found out, checked for the heartbeat, or had the ultrasound done and so forth. And so I think I think we have to, I guess at least for the sake of the part of abortion for this talk, I do think we have to hold strong as Christians that this taking a life is murder.
Well, I think that the bringing D&C, I can't remember the exact terminology for it is, but to bring that into this conversation is ceding some ground already, because we are now conflating it with abortion, and the two things are not the same at all.
Right. It is considered a procedure that could be used as part of abortion.
It is a part in later term abortions. It is a required portion of it.
Right.
But
what is the specific thing we're talking about?
D&C is removing the non-vital field tissue. Mm-hmm. So if you have a late enough abortion, then you have to go in and perform a D&C. Mm-hmm. But women who receive them because of miscarriages at whatever stage,
atopic pregnancy.
it is separate and apart from the concept of abortion in medical practice.
Yes. I didn't mean to conflate those two. I was more drawing on the fact that that there is that motherly intuition.
And I think it is important to bring it up just so that we can make that distinction.
Yes.
Because it is oftentimes caught up in the conversation of abortion.
Right. The things that can be provided along with, like I'll just flat out say, like when Roe v. Wade was overturned, I know many people were upset because of all of the I guess secondary procedures that would theoretically be jeopardized because they are related or adjacent to abortion in one way or another, and D&C was considered one of those.
I think I'm not going to go into that. I'll stop. I think you can cut this out later if it's too spicy. I'm just going to say that. But I think, especially after Roe v. Wade was overturned, that was used as like a bludgeoning thing to scare people, as a scare tactic. That if abortion is banned in your state, you're not going to be able to get D&Cs done. Mm-hmm. Was that an actual thing? I don't think that was an actual thing.
Yeah. No, and that's why I'm bringing
abortion
up this
was
point.
banned in Indiana. I don't know if this makes sense, but to your point of intuition and a mother's sense of intuition, in general, I feel like people have a general intuition, and I see a lot that there's an inconsistency in how people view abortion. Mm-hmm. The inconsistency I see is you can have, in some very progressive states, almost full-term abortions. Mm-hmm. Give that like another 2 months, and that's an infant, and that mother smothers that infant, that murder's going to prison for murder. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But if she kills that baby before it exits her womb, she's fine.
Right.
There's a huge inconsistency here, and there's a clip of Bill Maher on a show talking about abortion, and he kind of, if you watch it, he really throws off the audience because he's very honest, where he's like, abortion is murder, and he goes, but I'm okay with that. And if you're pro-life, if you're pro-choice, you're also okay with that.
That's technically a logically consistent point of view. It's it's kind of disgusting.
Yeah,
when you put it that way.
That's what people walk around, is they want to step around what they actually believe.
Right.
And that might sound that sounds harsh, but you have to be logically consistent.
It's something we've talked about before, that people don't chase things down to their first principles. Mm-hmm. And that's why I started off from that point of view of like, once you've got a complete set of DNA, that is a human being. So from there, the answers become very, very apparent. So taking this at a different angle, we're not a political podcast,
right?
So like, we unfortunately don't have the step-by-step process of how to get this rectified through legal means. We're trying to help people find their balance in this conversation, so that they can approach it from a point of view, like to understand what they believe and to be able to speak on it fully. So we can move from here into IVF, which is a related issue. I think that all three of these issues kind of are nesting dolls, because abortion lies at the center. With abortion, you have IVF, which where you have a fertilization of the egg outside of the womb in a petri dish. Generally, I don't know if it's actually a petri dish, but
Right.
some sort of medical glassware.
Right.
And then, as I point out in my story, that they sort through those and pick out the quote unquote best ones in order for implantation. They usually do it in doubles because they don't always take
Right.
part of the intro. So what happens with those other fertilized eggs? Because if we're taking it from the perspective of like, if you have a complete set of DNA, you have a person, and all those are future people out there in the petri dishes. And that's where I put into my story that the seeds that had sprouted were put away. That's the snowflake baby idea, that there are a lot of fertilized eggs out there that are locked away and probably will never be used.
Right. Yes, I think the problem with IVF is clearly the unused babies. I don't know. I don't want to say the unrealized babies because, again, I feel like that is conceding and is not really what I think. But I think the undeveloped,
unfulfilled lives.
Yes, and so they sit out in perpetuity, and they could be used, but that's up to the parents, the mother's discretion. And in many cases don't go used, I would say. And so again, I think we end up back at murder because we aren't valuing those lives and we are choosing to undermine them. Now, here's where I see the most nuance, as you already said as well, Zander. Like I know many people, friends, family that have utilized IVF as the way for them to even be able to have children at all. In fact, I know one couple in particular flat out thought it was wrong and struggled to have children for a long time, went through several rounds of adoption, which unfortunately also fell through because of several other circumstances. And then finally came back to IVF. And, I would say, praise God, they have a beautiful daughter now. But I think it is difficult because we have all of these unfulfilled lives just sitting out in, on ice.
And I think that this is where that trap of loyalty to science comes into play. It's like we've already done this like a lot. So, I mean, if we stop now, we're admitting that we've done something wrong in the past. Mm-hmm. And that's difficult for people to admit when recognizing your own failings is sometimes the hardest thing to do.
Right.
And so when it comes to IVF, the children are a great thing.
Yes.
Like, I'm not saying that the children born through IVF shouldn't exist.
Mm-hmm. It's just hard to absolutely fault a couple that sees that as their only option.
Well, and that's where a lot of it all seems kind of can resolve itself, because the babies who have died to abortion, mm-hmm. if those babies are born, we have more babies that are available for adoption, possibly.
Sure.
And there's a secondary issue where like the adoption process is unnecessarily complicated. And
right.
and in this, I'll get on a little bit of a soapbox where the church is seated, evangelical churches have ceded a lot of ground in assisting with adoptions. Mm-hmm. The Catholic Church still does it through like various organizations to a lesser extent. I mean, I won't mention that actually. So I think that something that you bring up often is that we have struggled with community for a long time. And I think that the church could come in and help in this situation mm-hmm. by helping organize those things. And you just like, adoption is a great thing mm-hmm. because it's children who don't have parents getting parents.
Right.
Is the thing. Mm-hmm. And there are parents who want to have children who can't have children. So it kind of, I think,
it solves itself.
Kind of resolves itself is the thing.
It's just made so hard to do.
Yes, it is an immensely convoluted and expensive process in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in this couple I mentioned before, they actually went through at least an instance to where a mother had given up her child for adoption, but then like kept, rescinding the offer essentially, and I believe they essentially paid 2 or 3 times to reinitiate that process with the same mother. And so at that point she was taking advantage of a system, and I don't want to muddy the waters here, but it just was, I feel like they were left so desperate after such a drawn out and horrible and heart-wrenching experience that they turned to IVF in the end.
And I think that actually leads very well into a subset of this issue, which is the commodification of childbearing.
Yes.
Which, I mean, why does adoption cost that much money?
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty straightforward procedure as far as like the literal essence of it.
Yeah. Confirm the families are safe and good, and
I don't know why it would cost. I feel like there's a lot of unnecessary steps there.
Right.
But we move from there and IVF. We go out of IVF into the idea of surrogacy, which is really where the beast bears the most fruit.
Yes.
Because that is a full commodification of childbearing.
Yes.
It can be. That's why I was very careful in my intro that sometimes you'll have like a familial arrangement where one family member will carry the child of another couple who can't have children for whatever reason.
Right.
And that's, I guess, like the best possible outcome for surrogacy.
Right.
But even then, it's the parents are putting themselves in primary position over the child because that child's life going forward has inherent confusion.
Right.
Inherent confusion. It plays into the materialist concept of the modern world where, like, technically, biologically, that child's parents are the parents that take care of her. Like, if a mother and father give their samples and have an in vitro implantation into this family member, biologically, that baby is theirs.
Right.
But in some very real aspects, like that baby is also the family member's.
Well, that's the thing is that, I guess in the least the physiological sense, the baby develops hearing the mother's heartbeat. Yeah. It intunes to her voice. It adjusts to the mother carrying the child, the surrogate in this case. Their body temperature, it already knows what they smell like basically as soon as they're born, and so it does become an extremely hard experience on that child because then you're immediately taking away all of the designed familiarity and giving it to someone else.
You've abstracted the science from nature in that aspect.
Yes,
and it's right from the beginning.
Yeah,
you grab that child from the chest of the mother,
right,
to whoever's taking this child, whoever's paid for this human being.
I was actually surprised recently. I didn't realize that surrogates in some cases actually have some rights to, like, almost in a like a visitation sense. Probably is nothing else to call it, but essentially they contract out rights. When they agree to be a surrogate, that they can talk to them once a week, once a month. However, and I feel like that only just makes it all the worse.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take a hard pivot. I think moving from abortion to IVF and to surrogacy, I think what we really see is a growth in a tendency to act more like God. Yeah. And so in abortion, we're acting like the absolute judge. Your life is not valuable, or your life is valuable. Mm-hmm. In IVF, we're playing God in the sense of like, oh yeah, these are the ones that'll work correctly. And then by the time we get to surrogacy, in many cases, I think we're seeing fringe, like designer babies in a lot of sense, like custom made, custom planned out of, I chose this sperm donor and I chose this egg, and based on all of the ones we were able to fertilize, this is the one that screened correctly, and I want this one because they have the the lowest risk of complications. And so then that one is implanted in the surrogate, and and then you don't even have, you completely wash your hands of that part of the process of being a mother, and it becomes very unnatural, sterile, and immensely scientific. Like it is
scientific,
pushing science fantasy,
scientific and commercial at the same time, because like you're spending all this money and you're purchasing a baby.
Correct.
Which is okay. Think about that sentence there for a second. Okay, you're purchasing a baby.
Mm-hmm.
There are parallels that should I tease them out directly? Think about other instances where you might purchase someone and what we feel about them now.
Yes, absolutely. It doesn't make me feel good.
It really. And again, like the victims here are the children, and that's why I take this so hard. Is that they have no choice in the matter how they're born.
Right.
So what are we pursuing in this? I mean, because we're trying to hold people accountable for their actions, right? I mean, that's part of it. Like, have them recognize. You were talking about this earlier, like the what you do, how you minister to a lady who has had an abortion,
right?
How you do that, and it's that difficult balance of what we come back to all the time of truth and love,
right?
Like we need to have people be able to admit that to recognize that they've made a mistake, like I said, and admit that it was a mistake, even if the outcome was good,
right?
And because children are a good outcome, and it's a natural, like I said, it's a natural thing to want children. So all these people wanting to have children is a good and natural thing, but we can't. Adopting science as the go-through, as the bypass to God's inherent design,
right,
is where we're very much putting ourselves on the Tower of Babel.
Oh yeah, we are reaching, and
Sorry,
go ahead.
I feel like the crux of all of three of these is what you said, playing God, and I think that's really where a lot of the uncomfortableness lies, especially with IVF, even abortion. I think it's playing God and is also very tied into selfishness. And I don't think it can be uncomfortable walking into that territory.
And I think there's compassion to be had. Sorry if I interjected in your thought, but I do think we see good outcomes from IVF, obviously. We see good outcomes from surrogacy. And I don't know if there's much good in abortion. I can't find much in and of itself. But in these cases, children will go on to live very happy, fulfilling, if the parents are Christians, very godly lives in and of themselves. And that isn't a hindrance. But I do think we introduce a commoditization, a flippancy, I'm just going to order me up a baby and, almost like it's, DoorDash or something showing up at your door and dropping off your child. And I think what we make is all of these have some victimization of the children.
Yeah.
And it's unavoidable. And I think we have to acknowledge that reality. And with the acknowledgement, I think that's where we have the opportunity to work in truth and love. And what I think that love is the side of we do all fail. We all fall short of the glory of God. And so in that way, we can offer the olive branch. We can bring them in. We can minister to them. But the truth has to still remain of what happened was wrong. go and sin no more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we must have both in an absolute sense. We must have the warm embrace, but the don't ever do it again. It has to cease.
Can I go on a little tangent
Sure.
little bit?
Yeah.
I feel like you said, abortion, it's hard to find the goodness there. In terms of surrogacy and IVF, I feel like it's something people struggle with is I think the church, family is a good thing. It is inherently a good thing. But I feel the church has almost made an idol out of family. And you can correct me if you think I'm wrong or off base here. But for people who are struggling to have children or people who are single, they can feel less than.
I definitely think you're right, and I think that's where people end up overemphasizing Paul's example of even the idea that some of us are called to not be married, and what we end up with is an overcorrection, and we take the exception and make it the rule in that case too, of like, well, maybe we should all be single because that's really the ideal, and then we can all only give more. But I do think we need more compassion for the families that cannot and do not have children. And I think that's where the Church of Acts is a good example of just the familial bond of the sharing and the joy of the children and raising them up together in Christ.
In the modern, very individual world that we live in, the church has done a bad job of emphasizing the greater community.
Right.
And people's ability to serve that greater community. People feel very atomized and alone. And the church has done a bad job of like, if you're struggling with these things or you're single or children isn't working out for you, that you can... The Catholic Church, I feel, does a better job at this than evangelical churches where they have avenues for like a single life where you're still a mother or a father, but to the people within your community.
The Catholic Church helps because the rules are so hard and fast. Like
Right.
they don't allow any of this. Recently the Pope came out and reaffirmed that as a rule. So in that instance, I think the Catholic Church does have a leg up on a lot of Protestant congregations and denominations and whatever you may have.
Right. They're absolutism, I guess, in some extent.
They're papal authority.
Right. But I think that absolute approach, I think, allows a lot of clarity on these things. And I do think we have a calling for more compassion. We do need to break down more barriers because I do think we have a lot of people that suffer in isolation because of some of the things the church fails to do today. I guess minor plug of I'm looking forward to doing the role and purpose of the church in the future. And I think that ties into it as far as the... I think that was actually the last episode, the previous episode. Oh, man. No. Go watch it.
Yeah, watch our previous episode because that's that one.
And so if we take into account what the church really is, it gives an abundance of opportunity to fill these needs. And I think what we see with abortion, IVF, abortion, IVF, and surrogacy, we see, a God-shaped hole in people's hearts that I think they are trying to find a solution for. How could I care for this child, or even what put them into that position in the first place? That kind of suffering and reluctance to take responsibility in that regard as well. IVF, obviously, and surrogacy, you're looking to fulfill having children. And so I think we need to address the root cause of these kind of decisions that people put them in the positions to make.
I think going back to what you're saying there, the responsibility aspect. There is the one abortion scenario that we have dodged completely at this point. Yeah, I guess two. The one that you threw out earlier, the rape and incest caveats, where, and I put that into the intro essentially with that concept. It's particularly tough. I mean, it is. But at this point, I mean, we're Christians here, right? So we have to go back and look at principles from the Bible. And it says that the sins of the father will not be put on to the son.
Right.
And I think that principle applies in this instance. And it's...
Two wrongs don't make a right.
Absolutely. Two wrongs don't make a right. And that is... could I say that? I don't know if I could actually go up to someone who was raped and found out that they were pregnant and be, I don't know if I'd be able to do that, but that I have to be able to do that because that's what I believe, and I don't know. And lying to them,
I think a caveat to that is a better way to look at it is: could you be there and do that for somebody who you're close to?
Right.
I don't think I could go up to some random,
of course not,
lady.
I meant someone who
yeah.
Didn't say that, but that was my mental thought.
I think in that tragic circumstance, you're fighting back more by choosing the light than choosing to just in that life.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think the answer is that you still have to say no. That you still have to say this baby was meant to be in this world.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. Boy,
this is the second episode I'll bring up. It's Romans 8:28.
Yeah.
I'm gonna actually officially open it this time.
I think it's technically the first episode. You're mentioning it in a later episode.
All right. Well, I got to get my notes straight, so we'll figure that out later. But Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know for those who love God, all things work together for good, and for those who are called according to his purpose. And I think, again, I know I just extracted a verse straight out of a passage with no context, but I think this is not necessarily the what you would directly, beat over someone's head of, but I think this is the call for us to look for the good, despite the darkness, the light despite the dark.
That verse is almost like the whole crux of our faith is we believe in a God who can work good even in circumstances where we can't imagine or see it.
Yes.
That even though we know we're going to die, we have faith in a God who promises resurrection.
Absolutely.
I think that actually sums up this whole situation pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And
having hope beyond hope.
Yeah. It does say before that it is the Spirit that provides this. So I will add that context. And I think that is where we struggle, even with some of the ideas like the fruit of the Spirit. I think we often overlook there's almost an attitude of we have to emulate these things ourselves in order to receive the Spirit, but it's actually the opposite is true. Only through the Spirit can we truly emulate the fruits and embody those in our lives. And so again, here, the same, if we truly lean on the Spirit of God, we will see the good despite the bad.
I think that's a good place to leave it off. That in the end, we all just need to rely on God.
Yes.
And that he will work things for our better. With that, we come to the end of the episode. I was going to plug things here, but it feels inappropriate. Yeah. So I'm just going to say, listen, it'll help you out. Go read your Bible.